Picture this, a vast chamber in Whitehall Palace, where tapestries of triumphant queens hang like flayed skins from gilded walls, and the air hangs thick with the metallic tang of ink and unspoken dread. Candle flames gutter low, casting elongated shadows that claw across the floor like the fingers of the damned, while outside, the Thames whispers secrets of drowned ambitions to the frost-kissed night. Her silhouette stands rigid against the leaded windows, a figure carved from ivory and iron, her heavy crown, that bleeding circlet of gold and rubies, pressing down like a vice upon her brow, each gem a drop of congealed royal blood. Her throne was already her tomb, waiting in the wings of history's cruel theatre, and that betrayal on a scaffold in 1601 would splinter the empire she had forged from the bones of her enemies, leaving cracks through which the shadows of mortality would seep, inexorable and cold. Hit subscribe now. Did you know 80% of history's queens fade into footnotes, their agonies untold? Drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching this crimson unraveling from? Your voice joins the chorus of the archive. Now, let us begin. In the waning light of the 16th century, Elizabeth Tudor reigned as the Virgin Queen, her sceptre a sceptre of sunlit steel that had bent nations to her will. From the ashes of her half-sister's bloody Catholic pyres, she had risen, a phoenix cloaked in Protestant flame, her court a glittering viper's nest, where poets sang of eternal youth, and explorers returned with maps stained in the ink of new worlds. Her England bloomed under that unyielding gaze. Shakespeare's quill danced across pages that would echo through time. Drake's sails cleaved the Spanish waves like a surgeon's blade through arrogant flesh, and the Armada's shattered hulls washed ashore as trophies of her indomitable will. Yet beneath the decaying gold of her ruffs and farthingales, the heavy crown pulsed with every heartbeat, a relentless throb that whispered of the isolation woven into her very bloodline. She, the last Tudor, child of Anne Boleyn's severed head rolling in the straw, had learned early that love was a blade turned inward, and trust a poisoned goblet passed hand to hand in the shadowed halls of power. But the cruelty had only just begun. As the 1590s bled into the new century, the losses mounted like corpses in a plague pit. Her beloved Leicester, that silver-tongued favourite whose whispers had once warmed her winter nights, succumbed to a fever in 1588, his deathbed eyes pleading for a queen who could not, would not, follow him into the grave. Then came the Earl of Essex, Robert Devereux, that reckless comet of a man, whose boyish charm had once lit her fading skies. He had been her godson, her confidant, the echo of youth in a body grown frail with the weight of decades. Elizabeth showered him with titles, lands, the very jewels from her own throat. But ambition is a ravenous beast, and Essex's grew teeth in the fertile soil of her indulgence. By 1601, whispers of rebellion slithered through the court like venom through veins. Catholic plots, Spanish gold, a desperate bid to topple the queen who had outlived her fertility and her illusions. 90% don't know this bloody secret, but you're about to uncover it. Essex's uprising was no thunderous revolt, but a pathetic whimper. A ragtag muster of 300 souls who marched on London with more bravado than blades, their boots echoing hollowly on cobblestones slick with February rain. Elizabeth, her heavy crown now a forge of fevered rage, watched from her privy chamber as the noose tightened. Paranoia, that soul-crushing serpent, coiled tighter in her breast, every shadow a conspirator, every cough a coded betrayal. She had survived the tower's damp chains as a girl, her mother's ghost haunting the battlements, but this cut deeper, a flesh-ripping agony of the heart. "My heart is too full for my body," she would later murmur, tapping her breast as if to dislodge the stone lodged there. Yet in that moment, as Essex knelt on the tower green, the axe gleamed under a sky bruised purple, and with a single meaty thud, his head parted from his shoulders in a crimson spray that arced like a profane fountain, soaking the executioner's boots in the warm, sticky evidence of her command. His eyes, wide in final shock, stared sightless at the heavens he had betrayed, while the crowd's murmurs rose like the keening of banshees. His screams painted the walls in blood, though no sound escaped that severed throat, only the wet gurgle of life fleeing a noble vein. Oh, the haunting irony! She who had danced on the graves of traitors now found her own footsteps faltering on the scaffold's echo. Essex's bloodied locks, presented to her on a salver like a grotesque valentine, became the first fracture in her porcelain facade, a quotable curse for the ages. I have been a fool to trust a fool. And another, his head rolls, but my crown weighs heavier still. In the days that followed, melancholy descended like a velvet shroud, her once vibrant cheeks hollowing under layers of white lead paint that cracked like parched earth. She refused mirrors, those traitorous panes that reflected not the Gloriana of Tilbury's speeches, but a woman whose flesh sagged under the relentless pull of time. Visions plagued her nights, ghosts of beheaded lovers, the spectral forms of Mary Stuart's vengeful shade, all clawing at the heavy crown that refused to yield. What happened next defies imagination. As winter's grip tightened on 1603, Elizabeth commanded her carriage to Richmond Palace, that ancient Tudor haunt, where her grandfather Henry VII had breathed his last, his own crown slipping from fevered fingers. The journey was a slow cortege of rattling wheels over rutted roads, her ladies-in-waiting exchanging glances sharp as daggers, for the Queen's throat had swollen, a quinsy fire raging beneath her skin, turning every swallow to a blade's kiss. She alighted in the courtyard, her heavy crown glinting mockingly under torchlight, and from that threshold the shadows began to swallow her whole. Was Essex's rebellion the crack that shattered her spirit? Or had the Tudors always been doomed to die alone? Vote in the poll above. Your choice echoes through the ages. Shadows lengthen. The heavy crown dug deeper now, its rubies winking like fresh wounds in the half-light of Richmond's withdrawing room, where arras of hunting scenes hung limp as flayed hides, their embroidered stags frozen in eternal flight from hounds with bared, threadbare fangs. Elizabeth paced the rushes-strewn floor, her velvet slippers whispering accusations against the stone, each step a defiance of the bedchambers that loomed like open graves beyond the oaken doors. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and decay, her own perhaps, for the fever had taken root, a bacterial serpent coiling in her throat, swelling it until speech became a rasp of thorns. But the shadows deepened with every labored breath, and what festered within would soon rend the Queen from her throne in a slow, inexorable unraveling. 75% of monarchs cling to power until it crushes them. Elizabeth's fall was no exception, a grim ledger entry in the annals of fading empires. By mid-February 1603, the court buzzed like a hive of hornets, privy councillors murmuring in alcoves where portraits of long-dead Tudors glowered from shadowed frames. The major beat unfolded in whispers and edicts. Essex's ghost had not been laid to rest. His execution, that gore-soaked spectacle on Tower Green, replayed in her fevered mind like a player's tragedy writ in blood, his lips moving in silent pleas as the blade bit home, arterial spray painting the scaffold in arcs of scarlet that pooled and congealed under the executioner's indifferent boot. She had watched the reports arrive, sealed with wax the color of clotted cream, each one a barb to her already lacerated soul. Ambition, once her gleaming armor, now rotted within, a delusion that she could will eternity into being, that the heavy crown could anchor her against the tide of years. "I am your anointed queen," she had thundered at Tilbury in '88, her voice a clarion over the Armada's doom, but now it cracked like frost on a frozen mere. Psychologically, it was a descent into the abyss of isolation, where every advisor's face twisted into Essex's mocking grin, paranoia blooming like black mold on damp walls. Her courtiers tiptoed through the palace corridors, their silks rustling like the wings of carrion crows, bearing trays of neglected viands, roast capon glistening with fat, syllabubs frothing in silver bowls, that she waved away with a skeletal hand, her rings loose on fingers once plump with prerogative. The vivid sensory detail haunted them all. The relentless drip of wax from sconces, mirroring the imagined seep of life from her own veins, while outside, ravens wheeled over the Thames, their cries a dirge for the dying age. And then, the extreme shock. On the 18th day of March, as delirium claimed her, Elizabeth collapsed against a tapestry, her heavy crown slipping askew, and in that flesh-tearing instant, her swollen throat convulsed in a spasm that tore a guttural scream from depths long silenced. Blood-flecked spittle spraying the air like a profane mist, staining the embroidered roses red as her namesake's thorns. "No bed," she rasped, eyes wild with the terror of final surrender, her ladies gasping as they caught her frail form, bones protruding like the ribs of a shipwreck under her brocaded gown. His legacy was ash before he drew breath, but hers burned slow, a pyre of her own making, quotable venom for the scroll. The crown devours its wearer, one sleepless night at a time, and she stood as empires crumbled, too proud to kneel to death. The haunting irony twisted like a knife in velvet. The queen who had imprisoned rivals in the tower's bowels now imprisoned herself in upright vigil, refusing the very repose that might have eased her passing. Legends whisper of spectral visitations that night, Mary Boleyn's shade urging her to yield, or perhaps Essex himself, headless and accusatory, his neck stump weeping ichor onto the Turkey carpet. Her physicians hovered like vultures in black robes, proffering purges and lancets that she batted away, their leeches writhing unused on silver salvers. "My heart aches for my people," she murmured, tapping that bony cage once more, as if the realm's woes pulsed there in crimson rhythm with her own fading beat. Days blurred into a haze of upright torment. She stood for 15 hours straight by her privy window, gazing at the frost-laced gardens where spring refused to stir, her legs trembling columns of will alone, until collapse claimed her onto a nest of cushions on the cold floor, her heavy crown rolling free for a heartbeat before a trembling hand reclaimed it. What would you sacrifice to outrun death's shadow? Your throne or your soul? Comment below and smash that like if her defiance chills your blood. Her modern echo lingers in boardrooms and ballots, where leaders refuse the handover, their grip tightening until the empire fractures under the strain, just as surveillance states today devour privacy in the name of eternal vigilance, a digital tower for the restless mighty. But the vigil broke on the 21st, when at last she yielded to the canopied bed, its hangings of crimson damask parting like the jaws of oblivion, and in that surrender, the whispers of succession began to howl, fever's unyielding grip. In the antechamber of eternity, Richmond's great bed loomed like a sarcophagus draped in blood-red velvet, its posts carved with Tudor roses, now wilted and thorn-sharp, while the heavy crown lay discarded on a coffer, its facets dulled by fingerprints of frantic retainers, each touch a desecration of the divine right that had armored her for 44 relentless years. The air reeked of laudanum and fear sweat, a cloying miasma that clung to the rushes like the breath of the dying, and through the leaded casements, dawn's pallid light clawed at the horizon, indifferent to the queen who had once commanded its rise. Yet in that final capitulation, the Tudor flame guttered low, and what transpired would etch her end not in triumph, but in the lonely ink of a realm unmoored. By the 21st of March, the major historical beat crested in a tide of reluctant concession. Elizabeth, her body a husk of brocade and brittle bone, allowed herself to be lowered onto the feather mattress that sighed like a confessor under her weight. The Privy Council gathered in a semicircle of starched ruffs and furrowed brows. Robert Cecil, that spider of a secretary with his hunched shoulders and ink-stained fingers, foremost among them, their faces masks of feigned composure as they knelt before the bed's edge. She had refused the sacraments, turning her face from the priest's wafer like a wolf from tainted meat, her swollen throat allowing only rasps of defiance. "I die with my God, no man between," she croaked, her voice a gravelly echo of the orator who had rallied armies with honeyed thunder. Delusion gripped her now, a psychological insight into the monarch's fractured psyche. Immortality's cruel jest, where the virgin queen, unbreached by lover or heir, convinced herself that naming a successor would summon the reaper's scythe. Her eyes, once bright as polished jet, darted like trapped moths. Visions of Essex's bloodied phantom dancing at the bedposts, his laughter a wet choke from that phantom gash. The vivid symbolic detail seared into memory. Her hand, veined like marble cracked by frost, clutching a gold cross that dangled from her neck, its chain biting into flesh already mottled with the bruises of collapse, as if the relic itself wept beads of sweat down her hollowed collarbone. Irony haunted the chamber like a jester's leer, the architect of a Protestant dawn, who had burned papists at the stake in Smithfield's acrid blaze, now spurning the cross's comfort, her heavy crown abandoned not in glory, but in gibbering fear. "The Queen's mind wanders," Cecil confided to the Spanish ambassador in hushed tones, but Elizabeth heard, her lips curling in a rictus of fury. Quotable shards for the pyre. "Death courts me, but I wed none but England," and her crown fell heavy, and with it the stars aligned for strangers. Then came the shock, raw and intimate. As night deepened on the 23rd, a final convulsion seized her frame. Her back arching off the bolster in flesh-ripping agony, a strangled cry escaping as blood vessels burst in her throat. Crimson foam bubbling at her lips like the froth of a sacrificial chalice overturned, splattering the counterpane in dark blooms that spread like accusations across the royal weave. Her ladies recoiled, one fainting dead away, while Cecil pressed a kerchief to her mouth, the fabric blooming scarlet as her life's ledger closed in wet, gasping strokes. What happened in those final hours defies the bard's quill. Under Cecil's coaxing, she nodded toward James Stuart, that Scottish upstart whose mother she had beheaded in Fotheringay's shadowed yard 15 years prior, the axefall's echo still reverberating through Anglo-Scottish veins. "He is my son," she whispered, the words a bridge over the abyss, uniting crowns in a union forged not of blood, but of bitter necessity. Dawn broke on the 24th, grey and unforgiving, and at 2 in the morning, Elizabeth's breath stuttered to silence, her chest stilling beneath the canopied weight, the heavy crown waiting in vain for a hand to reclaim it. No trumpets blared, no crowds roared, only the keening of maids and the scratch of Cecil's quill, inking the proclamation that would usher in the Stuarts, their thistle emblem strangling the Tudor rose. Her modern shadow falls long across capitals and corporations, where aging autocrats refuse the baton, their paranoia birthing vacuums that invite chaos, echoing today's elder statesmen who stand vigil against obsolescence, their legacies rotting from within like untended crowns. As the sun climbed indifferent over Richmond's turrets, her body was encoffined in lead and oak, borne to Westminster where she joined her kin in the vault's chill embrace, her effigy gazing sightless at eternity, ruffs starched eternal. The heavy crown, polished anew for the mask of monarchy, passed to James, but its weight lingered in the air like a curse unspoken. For in her tragic death, Elizabeth revealed the rot at empire's heart. Power's throne is ever a gilded pyre, consuming its occupant in flames of solitude. Chains of ambition rusted to dust in her wake, leaving only echoes in the stone. The rattle of a queen's unyielding will, the drip of blood from a circlet too heavy to bear. What price do we pay for power today, when leaders like her cling to shadows rather than yield the light? Drop your thoughts below. Your words are the next thread in history's crimson tapestry. Subscribe for more bloody truths from the archive, and ring the bell to never miss a whisper from the vault. If this queen's lonely vigil stirred your soul, share it with one who walks their own heavy-crowned path. The crown's final yield. The heavy crown, now cold in its velvet-lined coffer, gleamed with a malevolent sheen under Westminster's vaulted shadows, where the air was thick with the dust of entombed Tudors and the faint, sour reek of embalming spices. Outside, London's cobblestones drank the spring rain, each drop a tear for an age extinguished, while within the Abbey's stone heart, Elizabeth's effigy lay in state, its waxen face a mockery of the fire that had once lit her eyes. The roses carved into her coffin lid seemed to bleed crimson under torchlight, their petals curling like flesh scorched by the pyre of her own relentless will. And in that final tableau, the Virgin Queen's legacy was sealed, not in triumph, but in a silence that screamed of betrayal and broken dynasties. The major historical beat unfolded in the days following March 24, 1603, as England held its breath, a realm orphaned by the Queen who had been its sun and shield. James VI of Scotland, now James IV of England, rode south with a retinue of tartan-clad lords, his coronation a hasty stitch to mend the tear Elizabeth's death had rent in the fabric of the nation. Her Privy Council, those vipers in velvet, scrambled to secure their places under the new king, their loyalty as fickle as the Thames's tides. Yet the heavy crown's weight lingered, its rubies whispering of the blood it had cost, Anne Boleyn's neck, Mary Stuart's head, Essex's folly, and now Elizabeth's own fevered end. The psychological insight was stark. Her refusal to name a successor until the final gasp was no mere caprice, but a delusion of divinity, a belief that her reign could defy mortality itself, as if the Tudor rose might bloom eternal in her unyielding grip. "I am married to England," she had declared decades prior, her voice a blade slicing through suitors' hopes. But in death, that marriage left no heir, only a throne stained with the crimson of her solitude. The vivid sensory detail etched itself into the mourner's eyes. Her funeral barge, draped in black samite, gliding down the Thames like a spectre's gondola, its oars dipping into waters that mirrored a sky bruised with storm clouds, each ripple a sigh for the queen who had tamed oceans but not time. The haunting irony was a knife twisted in the gut of history. She who had forged an empire from the ashes of religious wars, who had danced on the graves of Spain's armadas, now lay powerless, her body a hollowed husk wrapped in lead, her heavy crown passed to a foreigner whose mother she had sent to the block. Legends whisper of her final vision, a spectral court where her father's bellowing ghost brandished a scepter of bone, accusing her of letting the Tudor name crumble to dust. Quotable embers for the ages. Her throne was a pyre, burning her to ash before the world, and the crown's weight broke her, as it breaks all who wear it. The shock came not in blood, but in desecration. As her coffin was lowered into the vault beside her sister Mary's, a clumsy pallbearer stumbled, and the oak lid cracked. A sharp snap like a bone breaking in the stillness, revealing for one heart-stopping moment the leaden shell within, its seams weeping, embalming fluid that stained the flagstones like tears of molten pitch. Gasps echoed through the abbey, a collective shudder as if the queen herself had stirred in protest, her spirit clawing against the indignity of decay. The moment passed in a heartbeat, the lid resealed, but the image burned into the onlookers' minds, a queen eternal, yet betrayed by the frail vessel of her flesh. What happened next was the slow unraveling of a myth. Elizabeth's Gloriana, that radiant icon of poets and painters, faded into the grey ledger of history, her portraits gathering dust in manor halls while James's court bickered over spoils like dogs over a carcass. Her modern relevance cuts like a blade through time. Today's leaders, tethered to power by ego's chains, mirror her refusal to yield, their legacies teetering on the edge of chaos as they cling to thrones built of data and votes rather than stone and steel. Just as Elizabeth's paranoia birthed a succession crisis, so too do modern dynasties, corporate or political, crumble when visionaries refuse to name their heirs, leaving empires to fracture in the vacuum of their passing. Was her refusal to name a successor a final act of defiance, or a fatal flaw that doomed her dynasty? Vote in the poll above, and let your choice ripple through the archive's crimson threads. The heavy crown, now James's burden, carried her curse forward, its gold tarnished by the blood it had drawn. As her effigy gazed blankly from its plinth, the roses of her reign withered, their petals falling like ash into the river of time. Chains of ambition, rusted and brittle, lay scattered in her wake, a testament to a queen who stood against death until her legs gave way, her heart gave out, and her empire gave her up to the dark. What price do we pay for power's embrace, when every crown is forged in betrayal and baptized in blood? Drop your thoughts below, and if this tale of a queen's lonely end chilled your bones, share it with one who wears their own invisible crown. Subscribe for more crimson truths from the archive, and ring the bell to never miss a whisper from history's vault. Chains rusted to dust.